Within the philosophical tradition of Advaita Vedanta, the central teaching is that the individual self, Atman, is identical with the ultimate reality, Brahman. This non-dual vision was most famously systematized by Adi Shankaracharya, who taught that the apparent multiplicity of the world arises from ignorance, avidya. Liberation, moksha, occurs when this ignorance is removed through the realization that one's true self is Brahman. However, traditional Vedantic teachers have always emphasized that this realization cannot arise through intellectual understanding alone. When Advaita is approached purely as a philosophical theory, without devotion, discipline, and divine grace, it can leave the ego essentially unchanged, resulting in subtle frustration and unresolved duality. Vedanta distinguishes between indirect intellectual knowledge and direct realization. A person may understand the doctrines of non-duality conceptually and even teach them persuasively, yet still remain deeply identified with the ego. The philosophy may exist only at the level of thought, while everyday experience continues to operate through attachment, comparison, and self-centeredness. In such cases, the intellect affirms unity, while the psychological sense of separation remains intact. Purely academic engagement with Advaita can therefore remain external to the inner transformation the tradition intends. Philosophical arguments may be analyzed and scriptures interpreted, but the deeper work of transforming the mind may be neglected. The ego, rather than dissolving, may adopt the philosophy as a new identity. Instead of identifying with worldly roles, a person may subtly identify as someone who understands non-duality. In this way, philosophical knowledge can unintentionally reinforce the ego it is meant to transcend. This situation often creates a gap between doctrine and experience. Intellectually, one may claim that all is Brahman, yet emotionally still experience irritation, defensiveness, or dissatisfaction. This contradiction can produce subtle frustration. Because the mind has not been purified through spiritual practice, the teachings remain theoretical rather than transformative. Traditional Advaita addresses this by emphasizing spiritual preparation. The path includes discrimination between the real and unreal, detachment from transient pleasures, control of the mind and senses, and a sincere longing for liberation. These disciplines gradually calm and purify the mind so that the insight of non-duality can become genuine realization rather than intellectual belief. Devotion also plays an important role in this process. Even Adi Shankaracharya composed many devotional hymns and encouraged surrender to God as a means of purifying the heart. Devotion cultivates humility and love, weakening the ego's hold. Other Vedantic traditions emphasize divine grace even more strongly. Schools such as Vishishtadvaita, taught by Ramanuja, and Advaita Vedanta, founded by Madhvacharya, hold that liberation ultimately depends upon God's grace rather than intellectual effort alone. When devotion and discipline are absent, philosophical knowledge can become dry and overly analytical. Because the ego remains active, the mind may seek expression through intellectual competition or criticism. The philosophy of non-duality may then become something to defend, rather than something that dissolves the sense of separateness. In such circumstances, a tendency toward fault-finding can arise. The mind, still functioning within dualistic patterns, may look for errors in other philosophies, traditions, or individuals. Instead of dissolving boundaries between self and other, the intellect may use non-duality as a framework for critique. This outward focus can reflect an unresolved inner tension between philosophical claims and lived experience. For this reason, traditional Vedanta emphasizes a balanced integration of knowledge, devotion, meditation, and discipline. Knowledge clarifies the nature of reality, but devotion softens the heart, discipline purifies the mind, and grace ultimately completes the process. When these elements work together, the insight of non-duality becomes a lived realization rather than a purely intellectual idea. Without them, the teachings of Advaita risk remaining confined to the intellect while the deeper patterns of ego and duality continue to persist.